California, the land of never-ending wonders and surprises. Literally and figuratively, Fresno County is to the state an empire within an empire. Imperium in imperio, as the Latin phrase may have it. The 31st state of the Union. The land now comprised within Fresno County's area was long considered desert, fit only for pasturage and worthless for agriculture, lacking the water to make it productive. Fresno, 41st of the counties in the order of creation, was a land area of 5,950 square miles. Well, it was larger, but in 1893 a slice of 2,000 square miles was taken off to form Madera County, and then were transferred to Kings County. But even with those square miles lopped off from the original 8,000 before partition, Fresno ranks 6th of the 58 counties in the state as far as area goes. In 1910, the county population was 75,000 people. Now, geographically considered, California is far from being a unit. It presents with its immense sea-coast stretch and its great breadth, traversing interior wide valleys, desert wastes, and high mountain ranges. Geographical conditions in remarkable variety, climates and productions, temperate to subtropical. It very well may be classified as an empire itself. The great interior, San Joaquin Valley, which is the keystone in the arch of the state's wealth, where the mother lode poured its millions of gold into the world's lap. Once one of the world's granaries in the days of the vast grain ranch period, and a leader today in the products of the intensive and diversified culture of the small irrigated orchard and vineyard farm, while the oil industry is confined to the coast range. The San Joaquin Valley has become the state's oil-producing region. Irrigation has transformed Fresno from a desert to an annual producer of millions, tens of millions. Its potentialities are boundless. Here in the central portion of the Golden State, there's an empire worthy the attention of the man with the dollar. The history of Fresno, we are told, was little influenced by the Spaniards or the Mexicans. As far as leaving an imperishable impress upon the region, there was no Spanish substratum, no life or customs to give the quaint and picturesque setting for the American superstructure to follow and to recall the days before the gringo came. Of the Spanish rule, there is no lasting memorial, except perhaps the name Fresno, which is the Spanish word for ash tree, applied because of the abundance of that type of said tree in the mountains of said county. As a political entity, Fresno's history runs back to 1856. It was unpeopled. Before that, it was the undisputed domain of the Indian, which apparently aren't people. The digger, as he was called, because he digged the ground for edible roots, bulbs, and insect larvae. People that came before me, they were barely people, just eating insects all day. They will eat the bugs, we are told. Who would have known that this would become the largest, most populous, influential, and richest area? The land redolent of romance in its early history of discovery, its very name allegedly created in 1510 for a romance of medieval chivalry, the most fictitious of fiction, etymological enigma to this day, except of course if you consider that perhaps the root word might be caliphate. But no, we're going to instead say that it was a forgotten Spanish romance, named whilst in search of the fabled fountain of youth, while it was a mere field of cosmographic conjecture, whether island, peninsula, part of mainland, its location on maps placed somewhere between Mexico and India with its boundaries vague. Land of gold, of perpetual sunshine, of natural blessings. Why, it was described in 1510 as an imaginary island located very near the terrestrial paradise, peopled with black Amazons who trained griffins for warfare. The only mineral on the island was gold, but it was also rich in precious stones and pearls, a rosy romance for any Spanish extravaganza. The gold was not unearthed from its virgin soil until nearly 3.5 centuries afterward by Anglo-Americans. I'm sure it was all very nice for the history recording apologists for these conscienceless gold-seeking adventurers to advance, spreading their faith to win souls through religion, but really, their motive seems to be always just gold, finding a shorter route to wealth and glory. Now, previous to January 1849, we're told California was practically unpeopled, except for the few scattered Spanish settlements. After the spread of the 21 missions from San Diego to Sonoma in the early 1800s, and after their secularization in 1845, the neglected Indian converts scattered and ran wild and wretched all around the country. As the sun set on the golden age of the missions, which were of course established to prevent Russian encroachment, I forgot there were Russians there, from Fort Ross and Bodega Bay, eventually explorers happened upon the central portion, the unexplored interior, which was named the Tulares, or the Tulare County, because of the immense swamps that were formed in the depression between Tulare Lake and the Great Bend of the San Joaquin. The valley was dry underfoot, but around the lakes and sloughs for miles, extensive swamplands, which was inhabited by a warlike band of horse-riding Indians who had a great fondness for horse flesh as an article of diet, we are hold. The first expedition was a 1773 with a man named Pedro Fages, with a few soldiers sullying out from San Luis Obispo. He was the first white man to look upon the great interior valley. He's also the first white man to be named Pedro, and only. A brave soldier, an undaunted explorer, a pioneer of pioneers, and a gallant and picturesque figure of early California. He was the first commandante of the military, the fourth governor, whose tact and discretion left much to be desired. He was never out, but he was followed about by a band of children, attracted by the candies that he stuffed his pockets with for distribution among them. I don't make this up. Someone else does. After a few uprising with the random Indians and tales of rather bloody campaigns, with atrocities committed on both sides, if the legends are to be believed. Mind you, this is in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley, a central portion of the state. In fact, Fresno City is practically the geographical center of the state, and it is the central spot of the valley, one of the 5 richest agricultural counties in the United States. Now, the plain like Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley was once a vast inland sea. Geological proof of this is not lacking. There was a time when the combined streams went out into the ocean through the Golden Gate, but owing to the sinking of the coast and a great convulsion of nature and the earth, according to Indian tradition, the river was drowned. When the gold seekers first appeared, the Feather River was navigable by a small boat all the way to Yuba County and Sacramento as far as Red Bluff. Time was when light river steamers could make the journey from Stockton. But in any case, in 1856, Fresno County was created. The first county seat was the foothill community of Millerton. As usual, with the development of a railroad line through the valley, the town of Fresno was created. It grew rapidly, but it was just a typical frontier town with saloons on every corner, the first church not even being established until 1876, and the town, of course, burned down several times, as you might imagine. A massive flood in 1884 finally convinced residents that a centralized government was necessary, and so on October 12th, Fresno was incorporated. By God, we've arrived. A rich and diverse history, much like its people and agriculture, and now we'll take a closer look as told through the buildings. We begin with the Bank of Italy, an 8-story steel and concrete building faded with brown brick and ornate terracotta, located on a prominent corner site in the heart of the commercial district, designed by a noted local architectural firm during a period of rapid growth. Bank of Italy, of course, became the Bank of America. Richard L. Felchlin was the architect on the scene. And just you look at that thing. Golly, Bob Hattie. What a beauty. Completely out of place, I'd say. If I do say so myself. Look at that thing. Golly. 8-story frickin' building in these day and age. Seems entirely unnecessary. How gorgeous. And we're told this bad boy was built in 1917, and it took 1 year, which is entirely believable. Next up is the Brix Mansion, which is an isolated reminder of the former character of its immediate neighborhood, because one thing you'll find in this area is there's lots of buildings that were destroyed. More than a dozen homes have been demolished to provide parking lots. Disgraceful. The old Spanish effect of cement over brick. An unusual touch, an observation tower room on the 3rd floor. Virtually unchanged after 72 years. And we're told, oddly enough, that there was an early solar hot water system which was abandoned at some unknown date. Seems rather progressive for the time, don't you think? Most of the time it was managed by the original owner, as your architect, Edward T. Folks. We've known that name before. And the life of Herman Brix is a confusing one. Losing his parents and 7 brothers and sisters to cholera, immigrating in the 80s to a German settlement in Iowa. After an unsuccessful attempt at grain farming, he leaves to seek his fortune in the Alaskan gold rush. Meanwhile, Coalinga underwent an oil boom. He formed a water company on his homestead and made a fortune investing in oil properties. He was president of the B&B Oil Company, president of the San Francisco Oil Company, director of the St. Paul and Fresno Oil Company, and responsible for many of the buildings as an investor that were built. However, there is some controversy regarding his wealth. You can see here, even the writer says, often sketchy and sometimes contradictory his life. Why only a railroad station and a saloon existed when he first moved here, we are told. We're told he was a farmer with a crooked finger on his left hand. As Mrs. Brix later recalled, after returning with several tin boxes full of rocks, the discovery of oil in the country made him a rich man overnight. But there are some disturbing inaccuracies in his obituary, which do not match the paperwork and do not match his wives' tale. Wives' tale. Other sources say that he started a water company, laid pipelines, erected tanks, and supplied oil wells with water. So whatever the origin and the date of his fortune, eventually he became somewhat of an oil magnate and very important investor in the area, deciding to build one of the fanciest mansions in Fresno. The architect, Edward Thomas Folks, born in Oregon, August 1874. At age 19, he begins studying architecture at Stanford, completing courses in civil engineering, zoology, physics, mathematics, and drawing. He left at age 21 to complete his studies at MIT, graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in 1898, is one of the top 3 in architecture, and his thesis was a building for the, of course, here's the tie-in to the exhibition of the fine arts, preserved today in the drawing collection of MIT. Wow. And accepted his first formal position with Boston architect Clarence Blackall in 1899. Blackall, he traveled to Paris, continued his studies at the École des Beaux-Arts, as you might expect, just like every single one of them. And in any case, Edward Folks then moves to New York City in 1901 to work for Cass Gilbert for 2 years. Then he goes to Paris in 1903 to study architecture with a grant given by the American Institute of Architects. Then apparently he went to France, England, Wales, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, Egypt, Turkey, India, China, and Japan before settling in San Francisco, where he established his first practice in 1906. All that in 2 years. Amazing. Opened a small regional office in Fresno after winning a private competition, which was his first commission in the Hotel Fresno. And eventually, he began construction on the Brix mansion. Now, we're told that any catalog of his works, however, will always be incomplete because shortly after his death in 1967, age 93, family members, fearing legal liabilities from the drawings in his estate, destroyed his entire life's work of tracings and blueprints. Many more buildings designed by him could have been identified if this tragic loss of documents had not taken place. Such actions by heirs, however, have been altogether too common in occurrence, particularly in Fresno, where similar responses have been the norm. Now, why would a family fear legal liabilities from having drawings of buildings in his estate? And why would they destroy all the blueprints? I mean, perhaps because fraud, maybe? I don't know. Maybe they weren't his? It seems like a common thing happening in Fresno in particular. I can't think of any reason why a family would destroy their family's drawings, fearing legal liabilities. Well, maybe you might help me out with that. But in any case, there stands the building with its remarkable tower for a home, very odd. And very old world. Get over here, picture. That's a great one. Wow. We were going to go with this, then we decided that, no. Look at the monuments here in the yard. Ridiculous. I don't even think that's this building. What is that building? What a beauty. Except for this red tile roof, which clearly added later, Didn't really do it. Doesn't really continue the theme now, does it? But still, wow. What an incredible ornamentation. It really is. Just look at that thing. A real beauty. Man, how cool is that? Frickin' delightful. Especially this, whatever that is. So good we pictured it twice. Next we have the very lovely Hall of Records. 3-story office building with a full basement and wonderful ornamentation. Now, what you'll find here is there once was an arcade or breezeway outside which connected it to the now demolished Fresno County Courthouse, which is sadly destroyed. In 1965, they destroyed the county courthouse for whatever reason. And there's still a fragment of the arcade with 4 doorways, but it's not the same. Now, the story goes, in 1928, the panel noted that the county records, which were stored in the courthouse, and the old people's home were vulnerable and result in a loss in the neighborhood of $2 million should a fire strike the courthouse, which had happened several decades before. Well, the records were saved, but their bulk and the consequent risk had multiplied appreciably in the following 33 years. We are told. There was a group of allied architects, sort of a super team of W.D. Coates, Ernest Kump, Fred Swartz, Raphael Lake, B.W. Peterson, and Charles H. Franklin. And this was, in reality, a means of keeping outside firms away from the Fresno market. This is a closed club, and you ain't in it. While Allied received corporate credit for the job, the actual design was of Henry P. Villalon. Construction commenced in a low-key manner. And finally, April 3rd, 1937, there was a dedication featuring a number of county pioneers, ceremonial tree plantings, and that sort of thing. Some of the officials had been already in for weeks at the time of the celebration, and some have not been able yet to enter. That's weird. Now, they did have to expand less than 2 decades later, and then another 6 years after that, they expanded it yet again and removed several of the lantern towers. Here's an interesting bit here. During one remodel, they were jackhammering a passageway open between the previously separate Hall of Records and basements that belonged to the building next door, and in the course of this work, a 4-foot wide space was discovered between the basements, and so they decided to use it for storage. Isn't that interesting? There's already a room down there. How could it just be discovered if they just built it? Very, very interesting. The architect, Henry, took his first job when he was a teenager, son of a cigar maker and opera singer. As a young man, tried to secure a job in the office of the legendary Julia Morgan. And his first major opportunity came during the planning and construction of the, you guessed it, Panama Pacific International Exposition, when he was one of only 6 architectural assistants hired in 1914, when he was still a teenager. How about that? And then he went on to design hundreds of buildings or so. At least that's what we're told. And then we eventually ended up working for MGM as a set designer. So here, feast your eyes on the work of a heretofore unrecognized master architectural designer. And it really is quite a beauty. Just look at it. I'm sure it's been a little neutered from its original state, but it definitely has a sense of grandeur that doesn't really speak to pioneer California coal miners, now does it? No, it does not. Ah, yes. Nothing says 1800s coal miners like scenes from a Greek garden in ancient garb. Wait, you guys want to join my band, dude? I call tambourine. Look, she's got one of those foam #1 hands. What a remarkable building. It really is. Just so massive. This is just otherworldly, man. Oh, there, you can see it's a feather. The old Phoenician feather, eh? I might have known. Pretty unbelievable building. Wow, look at that. It's like you're entering a temple. Very scientific, like futuristic, sort of. Looks like a scene from Fifth Element. Complete with alien technology and alien drinking fountain. Even the font looks futuristic. Fresno, you've outdone yourself. Next up is the Memorial Auditorium. A massive structure of reinforced concrete, essentially unchanged, built in 1 year, dedicated on December 31st, 1936, with a partial basement, with massive large bronze light fixtures mounted on the columns. Minor changes to the exterior over the years, located on a naturally elevated site which slopes downward, with an 8-foot change in elevation, consisting of an entire city block, right across the street from the famous Fresno City Water Tower, surrounded by government buildings. At the dedication address, it was said, "The earliest settlement at the present site of Fresno dates back to 1872, only 65 years ago. From that rude and humble beginning has sprung our beautiful and prosperous city of today." And he goes on to say, "Now we are equipped with an auditorium commensurate with our dignity as a city, our wealth, our homes, and our culture." And they went on to hold events here, from Broadway plays to Metropolitan Opera to high school graduations to circuses to fashion shows to fraternal conventions, automobile shows, square dance, folk dance conventions, roller derbies, Harlem Globetrotters, ballet, religious rallies, Philharmonic orchestras, fundraising events, travelogues, lectures, public and private dances, and political rallies. Built by the same alliance of Fresno architects that built everything around here. And just look at this monster. Man, this area must just be full of massive behemoth blocky buildings. You know, it just must. How cool is that? Although, again, with the weird, like, goat head symbolism, which we see all over California, to my troubled eyes. What an amazing building. Except for that side, it looks rather boring and modern. Looks very much like the other ones. Very thematic. Hello, fountain. I might have known. Oh, a bunch of fakies. Helen Keller. Yeah, right. There's the famous water tower, but that's across the street now. That'd be cheating, wouldn't it? A little too early for that. Let's go to Dinky Creek Bridge. Dinky. My least favorite words, probably. At least when it's a town. This is Dinky Creek, a perennial creek in the small recreational community of Dinky Creek, in a beautiful wooded valley not far from stands of giant sequoia redwood trees. The bridge was built in 1938 to serve the increasing needs of recreational and commercial traffic. It was closed to vehicular traffic in 1965 due to rot in the timber decking and in the brains of the Californians. Mr. T.K. May was the designer of Mr. T.K., also known as Tank, was a bridge engineer, and he made it out of Douglas fir. The name Dinky, by which the creek, lake, meadow, and nearby mountain peak are known, originated from a dog by that name. There are 2 versions of this story. One is that in 1863, a party of 4 hunters and their small dog Dinky had a fight with a grizzly bear. The dog was injured, and the men named the place and the creek Dinky. The other version is Frank Ducey, the early sheep rancher, built the first cabin at Dinky Meadow, and he was saved from an attacking bear by his small dog Dinky, who grabbed the bear by the hind leg, giving Ducey time to reach his rifle and dispatch the bear. Unfortunately, Dinky was killed, so Ducey named the area for the dog. Mr. May was well respected, a master, and not the equal of the many true giants of bridge engineering, like John Leonard, the guy who loves and proposed marriage to reinforced concrete. Aside from the bits about the dog Dinky, this is a otherwise unremarkable bit of Fresno County history, bringing you the real juice here, type of deep dives that no one else gives you and you don't want. The Einstein house, which has an attic that was transformed into a ballroom, home of Louis Einstein, pioneer merchant, banker, and civic leader. Came to America at age 18 in 1847, engaged in the dry goods business in Memphis. Then he came to work for the Wormser brothers as a bookkeeper in 1866. And later on in Portland, he became a businessman. Ended up here in 1871, establishing a permanent home, and he dealt grain, flour, and provisions under the firm name of Jacob and Einstein. It was looted once, his store, in a memorable robber raid by the bandit gang of Vasquez. The village was shot up by the desperados and the pursuing villagers, and Mr. Einstein was left a gagged and pinioned victim by the robbers. Mr. Einstein, the merchant, financed many ranchers, served as president of the bank, which, wow, just randomly established a private bank. He was also president of the Einstein Investment Company and the First National Bank of Coalinga, and active in nearly all economic developments, irrigation, gas, streetcar ventures, a good neighbor, morally and civically uplifted the community, organized the free library movement, and served as a member of the library board, being a member when the Carnegie Library was built in 1904, generous benefactor of the liberal arts and music, active in the formation of the Unitarian Church, one of the foremost pioneers of Fresno, and clearly with the name Einstein and the subsequent information, we can tell he was a real resetter of the day. One of those plants that got here, knew exactly what to do, where to go, and how to make an interesting roof on his house. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. Kind of looks like those old mossy roofs that you see in like Iceland. Beautiful home. Edward T. Folks was the architect. The same guy that we read about earlier. They built the Brix mansion. How about that? Now we come to perhaps one of the more curious of the exhibits here. We've touched on this once in the past, and it is called the Forestier Underground Gardens. It's an underground home and gardens, 10 acres of an original massive parcel. What remains is basically unaltered, except for some deterioration from rain and erosion and neglect. Ravages of time, reversals of fortune, that sort of thing. Some of the acreages were sold, and in spite of these misfortunes, and in spite of the subsequent encroachments of commercial and industrial developments, and the preemptions of land for irrigation ditches and things like this, 10 acres remain. The original underground home, parts of which were left to fall in a state of disrepair, for shame, is about a complex of underground caverns, grottos, patios, and garden courts which encircle the underground home, Mr. Forestier, interconnected with underground passageways and promenades, together with a lengthy auto tunnel, about 800 feet long, which winds its way through the gardens, which are embellished with planters and seats. There are columns and arches and domes, and they are made of a native stone that is pervasive to the area. Some ceilings are vaulted and curved like inverted teacups, others have skylights, cascading grapevines. There are planters with wide varieties of trees: almond, pomegranate, Italian pear, olives, persimmons, avocado, carob, jujube, strawberry trees, black figs, grapefruit, kumquats, and mulberries. There's a small fish pond in the garden court off the kitchen, small footbridge, and there's a walk-under aquarium with a circular grass bottom which tropical fish could be observed. On the ground level, there's a small lake, and some of this you can barely faintly detect because it was filled in by tenants for the present parking lot, bastards, and it was designed and sculpted with hand tools by Baldassare Forestier, a Sicilian immigrant who in the earlier part of the century found sufficient time to devote to such a remarkable, extraordinary undertaking. Beneath his ranch, working alone, 50 rooms connected with passageways, and he did this for 23 years or so. Died at the age of 67. He wanted to be laid to rest in the gardens, but no. Instead, they buried him at the Holy Cross Cemetery 5 miles away. I find this to be very suspicious. He did not require a blueprint. He followed his own creative instincts. No plans were made. Every detail originated in his brain and was never set on paper. One of the most involved and yet delightful labyrinths of modern ages, it was said. A testament to the spirit of individualism and the uniqueness of man. All the more amazing since there was no power tools or earth-moving machinery. Just a pick, a shovel, a wheelbarrow, and an incredible amount of hard work. That's what we are told. But as usual, I have my suspicions. This was perhaps part of something that already remained, which is buried. My boy just dug it out. I don't know. Perhaps I'll never know. This little beauty is a Paul Kendler house called the Castle. It has a 2.5-story plus a full basement. We're told it's an excellent example of 1920s period revival architecture. Well, really, it's because of the gentleman that built it and lived in it, Paul Kendler, a local masonry craftsman. One of the finest examples of its type, built more than 50 years ago. And Paul Kendler was the masonry contractor on most of the major commercial buildings erected in Fresno during the 1920s. He was born in Germany in 1876, learned the trade of brick mason, immigrated to the United States at the age of 30, settled in Ohio. Somehow, a year later, well, he says he erected some of the best buildings in Toledo, and then somehow a year later he arrived in Fresno, and soon became known for the quality of his brick and terracotta. He worked with architect Richard Felchlin, who designed most of the major buildings that Kendler worked on, and this is one of the few known residential commissions from Felchlin's office, which we hear that all the time on these lists. He worked on the Bank of Italy we looked at earlier, and a number of properties that are on these registries, including the tallest building in Fresno. Odd thing about it is him and his wife Meda and a stepson moved into the house in April of 1929 and lived there for 3 years before they sold it. But he still remained in Fresno and died 15 years later or so. And the person he sold it to, Alfonso Borelli, and his wife Teresa, lived there for 33 years. And he was the founder of the locally based Perfection Macaroni Company. An odd addition, that little 33 years bit, isn't it? And yeah, it's called a castle, but it doesn't really look like one. This looks like a lovely little Queen Anne property, really. Not knocking it, but it seems odd. It seems like only lived there for 3 years, huh? The other guy lived there for 33 years, and they still call it the Paul Kendler house. I don't know. Almost seems like just an alibi to have a brick mason on hand in Fresno. They got to assign him a house. Sort of like what we saw with Cortland Gross, one of these fake people. I don't know. Just throwing it out there. What it seems like to me. Yeah, we got the Fresno Bee building, and we are told that at the time of its construction in 1923, there was one interesting thing. There was a roof over the 3rd floor, which had 2 to 3 feet of earth on it and a lawn with a sprinkler system. Very odd. They have that on the roof of a newspaper building. We're told that this highly ornamented, mythologically designed architectural beauty suffered from many continuous evolving modifications, which greatly annihilated the facade on the original design, with numerous curious casualties during a half-century of change, including the total destruction of the business office vault, the removal of the original chandeliers, replacing with fluorescent light fixtures, the multiple repaintings, and the removal of the mansard roof. Now, apparently, around the time of this writing, about 40 years ago, they were going to attempt to revitalize it and totally restore it to its original condition. We are told by this article here, from the midst of an unfinished building with the clatter of hammers drowning the click of typewriters, the Fresno Bee emerged. As the newest arm of the Sacramento-based, politically entrenched James McClatchy Publishing Company, the Fresno Bee initiated an aggressively competitive advertising and subscription campaign to capture the daily circulation stakes. And in one short decade, he closed down the fellow pioneer California newspaper, the Morning Republican, and thus this classic contest of journalistic enterprise came to an end. James McClatchy was an itinerant baker who moved here from New York City from Ireland with the fever of journalism in his veins. Drifted around the office of the New York Tribune, not as a worker, just as a drifter, becomes a friend of Horace Greeley, who encouraged him to travel west as a correspondent for the Tribune. After a treacherous journey via the Isthmus of Panama to California, McClatchy settled into reporting the colorful and often violent territorial news. The 33-year-old McClatchy was a fiercely independent man. He decided to publish his own newspaper in the sparsely populated Gold Rush era. The strength of his convictions resulted in one of the longest unbroken lines of the newspaper ownership in California. Not much fanfare about this building when it was under construction, and only 6 decades later, this 6-floor structure was empty and vulnerable to threats by urban renewal. Now, about the designer, Leonard Starks. Starks was born in Sonoma County, California, continued his architectural studies after graduating technical school under the auspices of a 7-year duplicate study system offered by the École des Beaux-Arts. He appeared to be a member of Atelier, which had its patron Charles Peter Weeks from the Weeks and Day. He worked as a designer on the Panama Pacific International Exposition, of course, just like everyone. Then he moves to DC, works on the Stock Exchange building, gets sent to California to construct a chain of theaters, and then eventually signed on with James McClatchy, which this was his first major design on his own. Of course. By 1965, Starks retired to paint watercolors. The president of the Historical Society in Fresno writes, "We cannot know that Fresno and Central California in general have almost no connection whatever with that California past whose romantic record has been so glowingly described by historians." I would agree. And here's the beautiful, yet scarred and tortured Sacramento Bee building. Yes, This is just completely brutalized on the side here, the back, and everywhere, for shame. And this part just looks so out of place. It's unbelievable. I'm surprised that this stuff stayed on. But the fact that to even think that this is built by some architecture in California is just ridiculous. In 1922. Another thing I've noticed here, maybe this is just speculation, but if we look at this picture here, and you can see the seams here where these little chair rails are attached, which is normal. This, however, appears to be all one panel, with the exception of right here. Here, we see two little imperfections, and it looks as if there has been something done here. And this is echoed by the cut here and the cut here, which you can actually see go down this thin black line here. Hopefully the resolution is okay. And it wraps around here. And the rest of this is an unbroken line again. So what I'm implying is that this segment in the middle was added on later. They cut into the wall to do it. They cut around this. They inserted possibly this one and this one. Thus you have these cuts and then this, just to add this retroactively to the building that possibly was already here. And that would mean that these flowers wouldn't match these rosettes, the other ones in the building. And actually they do not. See, this rosette here does not match. This is different kind of petals. And also up here, different kind of petals. These are wide and flat, almost like daisy. And even down here, different. Oh, sorry, down here, on these. So you would think there'd be some sort of uniformity. And there's, of course, also this. That symbol is everywhere. The energy symbol. But you would think that, and I know it's nitpicky, but it's, I mean, not saying that they all had the match, but it just seems to me like there's, that's a little odd. Because well, if you're making all of this as one solid piece, why would this be any different unless it was added at a different time? Anyway, that's what Maud Bryan came up with. Just, there's not any solid proof, but just, just evidentiary, And what a beautiful building. Look, this is ridiculous. Take the chandeliers out and put these things in. What a joke. How disturbing. And hopefully they revived it well. I mean, one can only hope. I mean, I guess it's already that'd be the past, not future. So presently, it should be fully revived, right? Interesting here too. It's got a brick floor. Look at that. And down here, look, completely odd. Very, very odd. And this is a drawing of what it could have looked like and what it did look like. Look at that beauty. I don't see no grass on the roof though. Must have been a different era. Wow, that's incredible. What a time to be alive. Look at that thing. What a beautiful building. All them printing presses was humming to life and everything was good in the world. Now we got the Fresno Brewing Company. Built entirely of brick in 1907. The interiors, we're told, of the office are still intact. And adjoining the office is a warehouse with a full basement with an original Otis elevator, which is electrically powered and rises from the basement to the second story, next to a black cast iron spiral staircase. They were part of a 20-acre brewery complex, which was built in 1900 with a 4-story cellar for fermentation. But the brewery complex was demolished for whatever reason in 1955, and so this is all that remains, the office and warehouse. They don't know who the architect was, but they think it was Eugene Matheson, and it was built entirely of brick, and it's all the remains of the brewery, which was one of the first large industries in the city, providing jobs for 1,000 people at its peak of its production. First and largest brewery in Fresno. By Ernst Eilert, founded it in 1900 and operated it until Prohibition went into effect, and then he tried to bottle soft drinks and stuff, but didn't really work. Resumed it in 1933 and continued, sold it to the Grace Brothers in 1942, and Ernest Eilert and his son William had moved to Fresno from Humbird, Wisconsin, where they operated another brewery, which they had learned the techniques in Germany, and sadly, it's gone now. Luckily, though, we have photographs of what it looked like. So here you can see the amazing brewery back here. Just an odd way to store the kegs, 6-story house like that. What a beautiful building, though. What a shame. And this is all that's left, just the office. What a friggin' joke. And that's the warehouse back behind it, which is attached and probably added on later. End of an era. Wow, look at that beautiful elevator vault. Whichever it is. Now we got a Holy Trinity Armenian Apostolic Church. Now this one is similar to the style of Armenian churches. Most of them are massive, powerful, intimidating structures with a center dome and a second remote smaller dome. Mr. Cohn, the architect, has taken a remote bell tower and incorporated it as part of the foyer. But he did use an octagonal roof and some other Armenian characteristics. Now, the ridiculous story goes, it's gone through quite a few changes over the years. New pews and murals and electronic pipe organ. They turned the basement into classrooms, things like that. Some of the interesting things are the crystal wall sconces and ceiling-hung crystal chandeliers. There's a central crystal chandelier hanging from the dome, which tells a story where an entire Armenian family was killed at the turn of the century by the Turks. 2 brothers survived to escape to Egypt, and while they were at a cafe, they overheard the conversation from an adjacent table of 2 Turkish soldiers, and one was commenting on how he killed his family in an Armenian village, and somehow it ended up being the same family. So the 2 brothers then killed these 2 Turkish soldiers. One was caught and hung, while the other escaped to Fresno Fresno. And when the construction of this church, when the church was constructed, he donated this crystal chandelier in memory of his family. What a retarded story. We're told it was handmade in Italy and brought to the church for $10,000. There was a fire in 1956 that destroyed the organ and the marble that was around it, I guess. It was the first church built in the tradition of Armenia in the United States, allegedly. L.K. Kondrajian, or Kohn for short, was Fresno's first Armenian architect. The first Armenian church. Wait. We were just told that this was the first one. Well, either way, there was another one that was July 9th, 1913 that was destroyed by fire. Okay. So, after the fire, they commissioned this Armenian architect to build the new one. They started November 1, 1914 with a handful of soil brought from the monastery of St. Krieger the Illuminator in Armenia, which was placed in the foundation along with other holy objects brought from Jerusalem. Okay. This was a place called Armenian Town, but basically not there anymore after the city of Fresno condemned 6 square blocks using eminent domain and built a sports complex and a new freeway system. Your things are now theirs by way of their actions. And all that's left is this church. It's all that's left of Armenian Town. Kohn was born in Turkey, 1888, and at 21 at the age of 21, he graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts, which was an Ottoman branch of the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. So because of that, he worked in Istanbul for 2 years, moved to New York, moved to LA, then to New York, to live with relatives and find work. Responded to a newspaper advertisement from Henry Starbuck, and he was hired as a draftsman and moved to Fresno in 1910, the age of 22. It was 2 years later that the Board of Trustees approached him to design its church. So then he did. It was the first thing he'd ever been designed and the first thing he ever would give me a break. After this, he moved to Washington, D.C., worked for the federal government, designed post offices and dorms for 27 years, came back to San Francisco, and eventually died at the age of 95. And his drawings were in the process of being donated by his family to the California State University. We'll see. From D.C. to San Francisco, huh? First church he ever designed looked like this, huh? The age of 24. Give me a fucking break. With soil brought from Jerusalem? I don't buy it, man. That's ridiculous. Built this thing in a year? Not bloody likely. Hate to be such a skeptic, but that story's just ridiculous. You tell me this is gonna be the first thing you're ever gonna build at the age of 24? And why would anyone hire you for this? You'd never built anything. You just worked as a draftsman. Why would anyone hire you? Oh, and here you go. With the quintessential, here, there's the proof. Here he is, Mr. Kohn. With the usual, we did it. Posing picture here. Top of some building. Impossible to say where he's at. Now, here's another one. Doesn't look like the same guy. But look at one picture of one guy on what appears to be a scaffold with bricks around him. Say, that must be him. That's proof. Up. And then suddenly it was done. Magic. Oh my god. Magic. What a joke. They must think we're stupid. Why would you even put those pictures in there except to prove that the guy existed? Hell, look how young he was. A freaking kid. Stand on this scaffolding, bud. It'll prove you built it. Right. And months, like weeks later, it looks like this. What a freaking joke. This is the Hotel California, a grand 8-story Renaissance Revival building in downtown Fresno, built by Raphael Lake, designed to be the city's premier luxury hotel. One of the only things left in the area of what once was a prosperous and amazing little old world skyline. Now, nothing left but the Hotel California. Brutalized, you can tell. Stripped of all its decorum in the back. A shame. It's no way to treat your legacy. What a beautiful building, though. Man. The inside's just okay, I guess. You know? Wow. What a great cafeteria. How do we devolve to that? God, from the ballrooms of old to that. Cafeteria, plastic tables. What a joke. Now, this is the M. Theo Kearney Park and Mansion, which is kind of a weird story about this guy who kind of no telling where he came from. He basically shows up out of nowhere, and 1892 to 1900, he decides early to dedicate all of it to the University of California, of course, and he plants a 11-mile stretch of road with 18,000 oleanders and assisted by one gardener. He wanted to will his estate to the University of California for an agricultural extension, but literally they just sold off all the land and basically stole all the furniture. And it wasn't until the Fresno County Historical Society wanted to restore the mansion that he also built. He tried to return most of those artifacts. It was only supposed to be for his superintendent to live in while he was planning building an even better dwelling a short distance away. This new house was supposed to be called Chateau Fresno. He was basically just hired to come in and turn the area into an agricultural region because farmers were struggling in the desert. Not really much about him. See, most of the buildings of the ranch town of Fruitvale were torn down by the county, and these were saved in 1962 from demolition. He had 850 acres in grapes, 4,000 acres acres in alfalfa, all kinds of stuff out here. Blacksmith shop, employed about 75 people. He was born in 1842 as a trunk manufacturer. Then he dealt with mining, stock, and real estate. Acted as a Fresno County booster, a raisin grower, a landscape gardener, and they hired him as a manager. Two guys, Chapman and Marks, who were struggling colony farmers, hired him to manage their enterprise, and he made these aggressive advertisements and sold all the land and turned the desert into a garden. Lined the streets with olive trees, divided the area into farms, and in less than 100 years turned it into the richest agricultural county in the nation, which was a veritable druid's paradise, unquote, the most beautiful park on the west coast, allegedly, and passed away before he could construct a beautiful chateau for himself. We're told in 1901 this building was completed. Somehow, the whole complex took just a couple years to build, and even though there's only a few buildings left, most of them were burned or destroyed by the university for whatever reason. No reason given, and this mansion was the only thing spared. And it is a lovely thing, and I think this is an outbuilding of sort. just a barn, this is a Victorian barn. No big deal. Just like everywhere, we just can't maintain any infrastructure of our heritage. The weird water towers. Like most cities in the San Joaquin Valley, Fresno is a child of the railroad. Its emergence as a city began in 1871 when the Central Pacific Railroad director Leland Stanford arrived in the area to select station sites. Now, glimpsing the wheat field in the distance, which was a wheat field made possible by a canal system, Stanford saw future potential. It had not been a place previously known for human habitation, we are told. But the early development that followed focused on the outlying agricultural land. Success of the orchards and vineyards transformed Fresno and it became the shipping and distribution center for the agricultural goods. And therefore, it needed hotels. First few opened in 1874. One, the California Hotel, which we looked at. There was also several others that were closed, including one hilariously named the Ogle House. The influx of people seeking to cash in on the boom supposedly kept two clerks at the Grand Central Hotel so busy they went prematurely bald, trying to house 250 guests per day. Town needed a state-of-the-art hotel. Enter Hotel Fresno. Truman Calvin White, one of Fresno's early entrepreneurs who had moved here in 1877, purchased a parcel of the Central California colony, had some success with raisin farming, and became president of the first raisin cooperative. Served on the city's board, was instrumental in organizing the National Bank of Fresno, bought some real estate, and formed the Fresno Hotel Company with other community leaders. Issued a building permit, hired our old boy Edward T. Folks, and constructed this 7-floored plus basement modern hotel, reportedly adapted from that of the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, known for its crystal-roofed garden court. The glass-topped atrium is still kind of visible in the skylight, we are told, although the greenhouse is gone. The atrium, at one point, had natural sunlight, fireplace, and pipe organ, all now gone. It was the social center of the city. 1913, it opened, giving it a construction date of 2 years it took to build, allegedly. There was also a theater, White Theater, made by the same gentleman down the block, which has now been burned down or destroyed. After a glory period full of grand balls and conventions, and dining room meals served in 5 courses in elegant style. Even during Prohibition, it remained the in spot around town, a social mecca for tourists and celebrities and residents alike. Now, all the 19th century hotels with which Hotel Fresno initially competed are no longer extant. Some of them were destroyed by fire, demolished in the 60s. Arson in 1953 destroyed the Hughes Hotel. Fresno City Hall, similar construct, was torn down. Sequoia Hotel demolished in 1962. In 1961, the new owners who purchased the hotel that same year were given 1 year by the city of Fresno to comply with certain safety improvements, and it was deemed unsafe. 1983, it was vacated, and it stayed empty for 30 years until it was rehabilitated into multifamily housing, affordable units. Most of its, as of 2011 or so, because of the inadequate mothballing, vandals, squatters have defaced it, removed materials, fixtures, and architecture elements, exposed it to the elements, and largely destroyed the interior. Sad state of affairs for the old Hotel Fresno. Here's what she looked like shortly after opening. Here's what she looked like in 1920. These neon signs have long since been removed. Look at that, $1 per day. Oh, with a bath it'll be $1.50. Unbelievable. What have we done to this stuff, this bank? And there's the main atrium here, decorated for Christmas in 1929, as you can see here. Oh, just gonna park some cars in here, huh? 1920 County. Okay, there's that organ. Ridiculous. But quite a beautiful place. How are you gonna leave this thing empty for 30 years? Look how poppin' it is. Pretty incredible. From that to this. Hold it up. Weird. How can you let a building like this fall into such decline? Doesn't make any sense. It's like the cities do this intentionally. Imagine buying this place and being told that same, like right after you buy it, like, oh, it's got some safety concerns that you can't, you can't afford. You just bought this freaking hotel. You can't afford to fix it. Prior owners didn't tell you anything. What a ripoff. And you end up not using it. I guess they were, some senior living was here for a while, but obviously the local artists have had their way with her. So whack. Sad, actually, how this happens. Third world freaking country, California. Get your ish together, man. Starting with the psychology of your people. Not everybody, but you know what I mean. Look at all that brick. Wow. The brick floor, huh? This is a sad state of affairs here. Look at it like this. Oh, of course. The same symbolism that we see everywhere. It's an odd thing to have on the wall. Gee, what a wreck. We have the Fresno Republican Printery building. Following that tragedy, this is a somewhat hopeful story. You got Charles Butler and Edward Glass, two architects who met and formed this association. They met at the University of Pennsylvania, remained on the East Coast, completing their apprenticeship, and Edward Glass eventually came home here, opened a practice in Fresno, and was soon joined by his old pal, Charles Butler. Glass was appointed to the California State Board of Architecture by Governor Stevens, and they were involved in a controversy regarding the Veterans Memorial Building, which was supposed to have been built in San Francisco, but never was built. They worked for William Randolph Hearst for a while, and the Fresno Morning Republican needed to expand their operations, and so these two fellows were signed on. William Glass's father had actually been the business manager of that newspaper, oddly enough, and so when the Bee put the Republican out of business, essentially, and was sold to the Osborne brothers, the families severed their partnership, and William Glass assumed control of the job printing business as his share of the settlement. He tried to keep his hand in the newspaper business, sold the Evening Herald, which was sneakily bought by the James McClatchy guy, who essentially his main competitor from the Fresno Bee, who shut it down, and he also absorbed this Fresno Morning Republican. So he had relinquished control of the company to his son-in-law, whose forebears had settled in the San Joaquin Valley as sheep herders, and this son-in-law continued the operation of the printing business into the 70s, even when advanced technology really made their methods out of date. They had to close in 1978, but everything in the building, when the historians discovered it, was antique. The print shop, the furniture, the press equipment, the foundry, the wood-type collection, which dated back to 1876, and none of these things are used today, and so that is why this printing building it has been gracefully restored and kept up by the original son-in-law of the original family. So that is pretty cool, this Republican printery. Now, even though it ain't really much of a looker, it is nice to know that there are still some efforts being made, even if they're low-key and hidden, to preserve these dope old buildings like this. Wow, look at that. The old printing press, that's what's up right there, dude. So yeah, follow a tragedy with a less than tragedy, you know what I'm saying? Here we have the Mowbridge Apartments, which is made by combining Dr. Maupin's name and Dr. Trowbridge's name, who were local doctors. 1912 was when it was advertised, at least, and Benjamin Gear McDougall was the architect. Too much about this one. There she is, looking right at home with all the others, and it's scheduled for renovation, or at least was in the past, which is probably our present. This is a bit older. Alright, Fresno, we are not done with you yet. Although in Fresno County here, the majority of the buildings are in Fresno itself, there are quite a few more that we've got to get to, but I don't want to run this one too long, so I will be back with the rest of these overlooked properties another day. I'll see you soon.